Okay, this is Yerd Yao checking in. I just wanted to say a couple things about the New Testament, right? And I was going to wait to do this until I got to the New Testament in Theory of Everything. And I think I will do it again once I get to the New Testament in Theory of Everything. But I just wanted to double, double down on the necessity of the New Testament, right? So you have to understand that there's a lot of information that you, as an Israelite, would not have if you didn't have the New Testament. You have to recognize that the stuff in the New Testament is not just stuff that comes from nowhere, stuff that emerged out of thin air, right? No, it didn't do that. This book comes from the Hebrew community of the first century, without a doubt. And of course, it's 27 books, 28, I can't remember. But it comes from the community of Hebrews in the first century. And we know this for a fact. The first reason is that all of the early church fathers, Origen, Clement, is it Clement? Augustine, Jerome, all attest to Matthew being the very first New Testament gospel written, and that really all the other ones kind of depend on Matthew and take from Matthew in some, form or fashion. And then also that Matthew was originally written in Hebrew. Matthew was originally written not in Aramaic, Hebrew. Not in Aramaic, Hebrew. So you have to understand that the very earliest copies that we have of Matthew are not in Hebrew itself, but have Hebrewisms in it, which lets you know that, first of all, that there are original Hebrew texts of the New Testament, that there are original Hebrew texts of the New Testament, and that afterwards, since the religion, if you want to call it that, became so popular that they were forced to translate it into the Greek, very similarly to how in the first century, second century BC, a few hundred years earlier, a couple hundred years earlier, they had to do the same thing with the Old Testament, with the Tanakh, that they had to translate it into Greek. And it wasn't because they wanted to, right? There was a Greek king who had prisoner, 170 Israelite scribes or elders, had him in prison and had him locked up, and bartered with those men on the Old Testament, Greek, and not the entire Old Testament, right? The Torah. All he got was the Torah, right? And they translated that into Greek. And I guess this is about the second century BC. They translated that into Greek and then gave it to him in exchange for these prisoners, right? And then, years down the line, you started to piecemeal other books together in Greek, like Daniel and Isaiah and all of these other books, until you have a complete Greek, Septuagint. The only Septuagint, really, is the Torah. The rest of it came in later, from different scribes and different translators in different eras in time. And eventually they compiled it together, and now they call the whole thing the Septuagint. But it was not easy for the Greeks to get a Greek Bible, right? That wasn't something that Hebrews just up and did, was write their text in other languages. That's not even something that they believed in. Josephus lets us know that when he said, Josephus indicates this effect, this sentiment, when he says that it is not promoted in my culture to learn a bunch of different languages. it wasn't something that Hebrews actually did, was go out and seek to learn and be proficient in all of these different heathen languages. They spoke Aramaic and Hebrew, and then some Greek. But Paul says that he speaks many languages, right? I speak more tongues than you all, right? So here's the thing. If you have information that comes from the community, right? And we're talking about the New Testament here, and how the New Testament is our information, our document. That comes from the Father, of course, but given to us. If you have information that comes from the community, you can't discard it. You can't just say, I don't believe in Messiah, and then throw it away. That's not how that's not how this works, right? You can't say that this document, because you don't like the document, or there are some things in the document that you disagree with, that now it's not worth anything, and it's not a product of your community. You can't say that as an Israelite, no matter what you believe in. You can't say that. And if you understand the text well enough, you understand that it's crucial to knowing what's going to happen in the future. It's crucial to knowing what's going to happen in the future. The timeline that they give in the New Testament is going to happen. It's going to happen. Okay, so you have to look. In the New Testament, the Messiah predicts, and you have to understand that this is a prediction. The Messiah predicts that the children of Israel will go into an extensive captivity and that the temple will be destroyed, right? And then 50 years after his death, 40 years after his death, that's what happens. The temple is destroyed and the children of Israel go into captivity. Do you see what I mean? The temple is destroyed and the children of Israel go into captivity. And people say, oh, well, that prophecy could have been written after the temple was destroyed and then well, no, because we have evidence to the contrary. All of the first century, second century, early second century authors have copies of the text that they're referring to that predate the fall of the temple. They're all telling you that these copies came very early on when Israel was still a functional nation, right? So you have the Greek, early Christian, quote unquote, fathers, scholars, no call no man your father. You have the early Greek Christian scholars, right? And they're all telling you that the information that they get are from the Hebrews. They're from the Hebrews about this. So is this somehow a Gentile religion if the Gentiles, the very, founders of the quote unquote Christian religion, are getting all their information from Hebrews in Jerusalem? What's left of it are getting all their information that it was either Origen or Jerome that said the first text of Matthew is in Hebrew, and you have to go to Jerusalem to get it. You have to. That you can't get it anywhere but Jerusalem. And they said it's there since antiquity, right? And so they are getting every single piece and bit of information from the community. And then the community has spawned the Messiah, who predicts the fall of the community. In the text, in the same text that you got to go to the community to get, predicts the fall of it. It's not something that the community wants to hear. So this is not something that benefits, the Hebrews in any way, to say after the fact, oh, this Messiah predicted it, this particular one. That don't make any sense to even do that. After your community is destroyed, what sense does it make to say my prophet predicted this? I mean, it doesn't do you any good. Your community's gone. You're in captivity. Your temple is destroyed. Do you see what I'm saying? So the information in it is proven prophetic. Not only that, they found artifacts. They found the stone, the pavement that Pilate stood on when he judged the people, and his name is on it. They found all sorts of artifacts from the first century that the Bible speaks about, that somebody from the first century would have to know. All kinds of artifacts, just a plethora of information proving that this document is yours, right? And so what does the document say? What does it say about the end of the world? What does it say about your condition in the end of the world? It says exactly what you see before you today. So you would have to discount in the text that the Revelation 13 mark of the beast, beast system, world system, is even such a thing. Where do you get that in the Old Testament besides the book of Daniel? You don't get no mark of the beast in the Old Testament. You don't get any sort of sign that you're going to put on in the end of the world that the evil will recognize you with. That's not in the Old Testament. That's new information. This new information, right? And so you have to look that Scripture says that some of these things the angels were waiting to see. Some of this information the angels didn't know. That are right there in the New Testament. It's right there in the New Testament. The angels were wanting to see this, how it's going to play out. And you can see right now how it plays out. Revelation 13, mark of the beast, being introduced in so many different ways that the enemy recognizes that as his mark. How then, if it's the enemy's book, and the book is telling you the mark and how to identify the enemy and what not to do, and then you go out in the world and see the enemy using that mark, right? You see the enemy using the mark. I mean, it's even on soda cans, right? Hebrew, you know it's on soda cans. So how in the world does your enemy believe the book and you don't? How does your enemy have the book and you don't? But you do have it because you were raised with it. You were born with it. The information is seared into your mind, but you just don't like it, right? You just don't like that your culture, your king, was stolen from you and then fed right back to you. If they made Michael Jackson white, which they did, which they had a movie starring a white Michael Jackson ready to go, and they stopped him from doing it, don't think it's not going to happen in the future. They're going to steal Michael's everything, right? And it is weird that Michael changed himself white. We don't know even what happened with that, if he did it himself or if it was some sort of disease. But at some point, I think that he was poisoned. I think he was poisoned, given a form of leprosy. And that leprosy allows them to easily steal the culture later. So anyway, we're talking about the New Testament, not Michael Jackson. But if they will, whitewash, Michael Jackson, then surely they'll do it for the King of Salvation, right? For the Prince of Peace. Surely they'll do it for him, right? And so it actually behooves them to do that, because if he's your king, well, who else are you going to need to follow but an imitation of your king, right? You see the imitation beast right there. The one that has power to speak, and the beast that gives the image power to speak, and it speaks like a dragon, right? Doesn't Mashiach in this weird lovey-dovey interpretation speak like a snake, a dragon? The lovey-dovey, only love and only neighborly and all of that, right? We understand the community must love itself. You have to have that, because the community is a hard community. Even back in the day, Messiah even said, he said, oh, look, an Israelite in whom there is no guile, insinuating that most Israelites are full of guile, full of trickiness, right? Oh, look, an Israelite in whom there is no guile. And then the response, who is this, Bartholomew? Nathaniel. And then the response is, what, you know me? This is what he says to Mashiach when Messiah first meets Nathaniel and Nathaniel, and he tells him, oh, look, here goes Israel right here with no trickiness in his heart. And Nathaniel, being a Hebrew, says to him what a Hebrew would say to him, or what a Hebrew today would say to him. What, you know me? You see what I'm saying? It's too recognizable for you to not recognize it. He said, what, you know me? He said, I knew, seen you in that tree, since you've been in that tree. You must be the Messiah, right? Right there, because of a very small instance of prophecy right there, that seeing you without you seeing me, right? Knowing that you are paying attention, right? And he said that you believe because I saw you in the fig tree? Oh, you'll see greater things than this. See and do greater things than this. Are you ready for that? Because that's what the text says. It says that you will see and do greater things than Mashiach. That's what it says. You'll do greater than these things, right? Not that you're greater than Mashiach, but you have the potential to do the same things that he did. Do you see what I mean? That's the powers of the world that is to come. Hebrews, 6? Said those who have tasted of the powers that are here to come and gone backwards? Oh, no. Oh, no, you can't. You're not going to go backwards. You're not a dog going back to your own vomit, right? You now know these things. You now know Messiah. And he was forced into you in a false image, in a false setting, so that you could understand the concept of Messiah. You went to 400 years of Messiah boot camp. That's what America was. It was 400 years of Messianic boot camp. And now he's seared into your community's consciousness, right? Most of your grandma's houses have his white anti-picture on the wall. The anti-Messiah right there on the wall. In your granny's house, in your mama's house, some of you. You see what I'm saying? You see how it took a foolish nation beating us over the head with Messiah in a false form to even realize, hey, there is a Messiah. Imagine you've got a stiff-necked people and you send your son to get them straight. We know there's a parable about this. You send your son to get them straight. They kill your son and still deny him. What would it take for you to say, this is my son in whom I am well pleased, right? Hear ye. What will it take for you to hear him? What do you think it would take, Israel? You think 400 years of extreme captivity would do it? What would it take? You have to look at the New Testament and see you in it. And see your people. And see your character there. And see Yah there. You have to understand it for the way that it is. For the information provided to you that is 2,000 years true. You have to understand 2,000 years true. The mark of the beast, Revelation 13, mentioned by John 2,000 years ago. And they're using it today. And you find it everywhere. It's hidden in movies. It's hidden on soda cans. It's hidden in clothing signs. It's hidden in logos for all of these different high-level corporations. It's hidden everywhere in your reality. That mark of the beast, they are using it as a mark of the beast. They're using it as a mark to show you who their people are. You can't deny that they're doing that because they are. They've got hand signs. They've got all sorts of things to let you know who they are. That means they believe in that book that identifies them. You think that it's their book and then it tells you who the bad guy is? Right? They've changed the book to such an extent that it must be important, right? If they need it, if they're the enemy and need it, that means it's an important book. It means it's true, right? No matter if they've done things to it, if they've altered it, if they've changed the names, if they've changed the interpretations, if they've given you a false image of the Messiah that's there, if they've given you a false Messiah in place of the real one that's there, no matter about all that, it's true. That's the proof that it is true, because they use it so much and they hate it. They use it so much and they hate it. It tells you it's true. You're not going to need something that you hate. No, you're not going to have something that you hate unless you need it. Right? You're not going to have the book that outs you and be using the information from that book unless you have to. Right? And a lot of people don't like it because they don't understand things in it. Like when Messiah says, this is one that threw me for a very long time. When Messiah says you can't take an old garment and sew a new cloth on it, lest the new and the old rent one another, right? Or you can't put old wine or new wine in old bottles, because the new wine will rent the old bottle, right? And so you have been raised to believe that the Messiah was saying that you can't have the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? This was the way that you were raised to believe that scripture is to be interpreted. And then you seeing that and having to deal with Messiah saying this, and the world interpretation of it being, oh, we don't need your culture, then that can make you angry, right? You make you say, forget it. Oh man, I don't even want to deal with it. And that's where this comes from. This is the defending Messiah aspect, that, oh, well, why should I defend this? And it's not even mine. It doesn't even look like mine, right? I have to defend it and I don't want it, right? Do you see what I'm saying? The same thing. The same thing as ancient times. It's 2,000 years ago we said the same thing. But that's what some modern Hebrews have to deal with. But they're not recognizing that, in that particular text, the question asked to him was, why don't your disciples fast like John and the Pharisees, like John's disciples and the Pharisees, right? So they're comparing Messiah's disciples to all these other disciples from these other prophets. And of course, Messiah says John's the greatest prophet ever lived. So we know that his disciples weren't doing the wrong thing. And then the Pharisees are probably just watching his disciples. As we know, the Pharisees would show up at these baptisms, right? They'd show up and be looking around. Who has warned you of the wrath that is to come, right? So we see that where was I at with this? I was talking about John and talking about Messiah and talking about something else, getting to a point. But anyway, I forgot where I was going on that particular point. But your book, this New Testament is your book, and you don't want to discount it because the things in it matter to you. They matter to them, and they should matter to you. I hate that I lost my train of thought there because I wanted to make this last point. But I guess it's 23 minutes, and we can go ahead and close out there. Just a couple of, I was talking about the garment. Okay, so the old garment and the new cloth and the old wineskin and the new wine is not talking about Old and New Testament, you guys. It's talking about the people that are being used. If you noticed, Messiah didn't take scholars. He didn't take, even people that were associated with the church at all. And, he's the Messiah, so you would think he would have surrounding him the top minds of the religion at the time, right? No, that's not what he did. He took regular folk, fishers, tax collectors, just regular people. Anybody, almost seemed like anybody that he ran across, but of course that's not the case. But he took people from the people, not people that were from the religious community. And so the Pharisees were the religious community. These were the scholars. These were the high-end, priests of that day, right? And the followers of John was the greatest prophet ever lived, and the people accounted him as one of the greatest prophets to ever live. So those people were still highly religious people from the community. Do you see what I'm saying? So John's followers were the most revered members of the community at that time, because he's a great prophet walking the face of the planet at that time, the greatest at that time. So the ones that followed him were looked at with prestige as well. Their actions were looked at as righteous actions. And the Pharisees watching them, fasting them, both fasting, to see what righteousness is, right? And so when you see that Messiah and his followers are being compared to all of these different groups, Messiah responds and says, I'm not going to use anybody that's already used, right? I'm not going to use, with this most important information, people that are full of information from other people, right? I'm not going to take anybody else's disciples. I'm going to get brand new ones that don't know nothing, right? That don't know nothing besides what I'm getting ready to show them. I don't need to be competing with no other doctrine, right? That's not what he wanted to do. That's what he chose not to do. And he's better for it, right? Because he don't want to be arguing with people more than he has to, because he's already going to have to. Everywhere he goes when he meets the Pharisees, he's arguing with them, and they're trying to catch him in some sort of trick. He's got to argue and fight with them everywhere he goes. And they're the ones trying to test him and tempt him, trying to catch him in a trap. He's got to argue all the time, right? And so he doesn't want to do that, and it's them they're asking, how come you're not fasting like they are, right? He's got to compete with all of these other people anyway. And he's not saying John is, of course, he's the one that says, John, there's none greater than John. So he's not discounting the disciples of John as unrighteous people. He's just saying they are the disciples of John. I have my own, which he has the right to do, right? So you can't take old wine bottles and put that new wine in them, because it'll ruin both the new wine and the old bottle, right? It's not talking about mixing the Old Testament commandments with the New Testament grace, right? Because then Hebrews chapter 10, and then what? Romans chapter 5, 6, shall we sin so that grace may abound? Elohim forbid, right? Do we continue to in sin after the great sacrifice of Messiah? No, because if we do that, we trample over his sacrifice. We see it as a light thing, Book of Hebrews, right? And if anybody trample over it, there's no sacrifice for sin anymore. So you just wait for your judgment, Book of Hebrews, right? So this is what we see. This is what we have. You have to understand that the Messiah is not crazy. He's not coming to do anything different. They've taken his words and they've changed them, because they need to do that. Otherwise, they're done. Otherwise, they don't exist. They've got to take that trueness and make it into a falsehood. That's the only way they stay alive. It's the only way they stay alive, right? So you have to recognize that, and recognize it as a weapon. This is your weapon. You don't put your weapon down, right? The tool is a double-edged sword. The text is a double-edged sword that's able to divide between spirit and soul. That's able to tell you the intents of the heart. It means that you can read your mind. This is what the text says, that it's able to read your mind. That's able to distinguish between your soul and your spirit. The text. Is that true? You know it is. It's definitely true for them. They're using the mark that it identifies. It shows them right there. It shows you the intent of their hearts right there. See what I'm saying? This is powerful. This is a powerful weapon in your hands. and you're setting it down. This is your king, your Messiah, and you're setting it down. You know, you've got to not do that. Okay, 30 minutes exactly. This has been just going over the New Testament a little bit. I was about to call it a theory of everything, but I can't do that yet because no matter how much I want to get there so bad, you know, to explain some of this, you know, confusion away in the New Testament and in the eras following the New Testament. Oh, there's so much information in those eras following the New Testament that it is mind-blowing. You don't understand, Hebrew people, that, and this is a lot of information that recently has come to light or come to my attention, but you don't understand, Hebrew people, that you were in England, you were in Scotland, you were in Ireland before they were. Hundreds of years before they were. Hundreds of years before they were. Do you understand that? You were in England, Scotland, and Ireland hundreds of years with that New Testament, some of you, before they were. You were keeping the Sabbath in Scotland before they were. Oh man, that's coming down the pipeline, you guys. You guys can, it's theory of everything. Once we get to the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and all that, oh man, this is what we're going to go over, is the Hebrews in Europe. That Europe was a black nation at one point in time. You guys, okay, let me go ahead and end it there. Shalom, shalom.